right, let's talk about what you rightly say most people are concerned about, which is economy, cost of living, and so on. And let's put the statement that you're about to make on Wednesday in context. You've already said inflation's halved, hit the target, but the government debt's still nearly 100% of GDP, according to latest figures, and that's higher than it was when Mr. Sunak said he'd reduce it in January. Retail sales figures are at their worst since the last COVID lockdown, and UK inflation remains higher, even though it's halved, than in the EU and the United States. And it's still well above your target, which is 2%. The situation's pretty dire, isn't it?
Of course, there are short-term challenges, but the bigger picture is that having halved inflation...
That is the bigger picture.
I'm just about to give you the bigger picture, if I may, Trevor. The bigger picture is that having halved inflation, which was over 11% when Rishi Sunak and I took office, we have turned a very big corner, because high inflation is the one thing no economy can cope with.
Please name me a thing that you've done to cool inflation other than wait for time to pass as the supply side shocks that happened during the pandemic and because of the war in Ukraine passed through the inflation figures. Would you like to tell me anything that you've done other than wait for the passage of time?
If you want to grow sustainably, you have to tackle that. That was an enormous challenge that we faced when we came in. And people said, it was going to be very easy, it was going to be mechanical that inflation would fall. We know that wasn't the case. And I think it's very important. You talked about borrowing. It's very important. I took decisions a year ago in the autumn statement, very difficult decisions that put up tax, reduced spending. They had the effect of reducing our borrowing from what it would have been. And it's because we have got borrowing under control that we can now see inflation coming down.
OK, I'm going to stop you there because...
That's not how inflation works. It's cost-push inflation. The reason why we have high prices is because of supply-side shocks through the prices of imports due to the war in Ukraine and due to the pandemic and the after effects of both of those things. Whether or not you change how much government borrowing you're engaging in, how many bonds you issue, has no impact on cost-push inflation. We know we don't have demand-pull inflation because people are having to take record amounts of money out of their savings to deal with rising prices as a consequence of supply-side shocks. That doesn't tell you we have demand-side inflation. If people are putting more money into savings as if there was high amounts of money in because causing high demand in people's pockets. But they're not doing that. The opposite is happening. The extra money is being taken out of savings accounts to be put into maintaining demand in the face of higher supply-side costs.
Two things. First of all, inflation, which is still knocking on 5%, is not low inflation. It's still high inflation. It's more than double your target. Second, of course you could have done things that made inflation worse, but actually inflation has come down because the grocers have reduced prices, because the oil companies have reduced energy prices, and because the Bank of England has used its lever of interest rate. It's not your doing that inflation's come down, is it?
Well, I think if you listen to what the Governor of the Bank of England says, he says it's very clear that to tackle inflation, you need the bank to do their job with interest rates, and they remain independent, as is right.
But also, I would say that the interest rates also didn't have any bearing on inflation because they dampened demand when demand wasn't high. Again, it was not demand-pull inflation, which is how you control it with interest rates, right? In fact, a lot of the interest rate problems don't even actually change until a year down the line, where the interest rate rises actually go through to the rest of the economy to be able to dampen demand overall, as people move on to new mortgage rates, as people have to start taking out new credit when they're running businesses. In fact, a lot of businesses run on so much credit that it means that increased interest rates actually increase the cost end of debt repayments for companies, meaning that they actually have less profit to have to put up prices to compensate for their margins. So in some ways, Richard Murphy was pointing out that higher interest rates might actually keep inflation higher for longer. So again, I don't think it's interest rates. We just have to wait, right? Prices go up 12 months ago. They stay in the system for that 12 months worth of inflation figures. Then they come out and suddenly inflation drops. It's really not a difficult process to understand how cost-push inflation works.
Right. And you need the government to make sure that fiscal policy, what we do with tax and spend, is consistent with that. And the biggest and the most important thing that we could have done in the last year was take those difficult decisions a year ago to get our borrowing under control. If you don't do that, then the markets say, OK, this is a country where prices are going to go up because they're pumping money into the economy with additional borrowing. We chose to take difficult decisions. But you know what I want to say to you, Trevor?
Yeah, so we're going to take the difficult decisions to screw over the disabled even harder than we already have done, even after there being a UN special rapporteur calling our treatment of disabled people a human catastrophe, quote unquote, right? Why is it that the difficult decisions are never tax the rich? Why is it the difficult decisions are maybe corporations have to lose the amount of bungs that they have available from the government? Why are the difficult decisions maybe we shouldn't be sending so much money overseas for other people to commit wars using our money? Maybe those could be some difficult decisions, rather than let's screw over some more poor and disabled people. And even then, again, as I mentioned before, there is no relationship at the moment between the amount of spending that you're doing and whether or not prices are going up, because it's cost-push inflation.
Because I do think it's important. There is so much defeatism, declinism about the British economy. I think we have turned a corner.
Okay.
And I just want to tell you something that I don't think you know about, and judging from some of the comments that you've said, we haven't just grown faster than Germany, France or Japan since 2010. But according to the IMF, when we get inflation down to the target 2% in 2025, we will grow faster than France, Germany, Italy going forward. And there are tremendous strengths in the British economy. And frankly, I know it's your job to scrutinise, but I also think it's important people at home know that actually we've got a lot we can be really proud of.
2025 is a long way off, and let's put this in context. I do know what you just said. German economy is flatlining or going into recession. So this is not a high hurdle to jump. But let's take
it is because
take your word.
Take me at my word. That would be a nice change.
All right, let me take your word. Fiscal policy, taxes, and all of that. Your answer to the problems that we're discussing is growth. Michael Gove told me last month that he thought the priority for the autumn statement should be cutting taxes on work, income tax and national insurance. Is he right?
Well, I'm not going to talk about any individual tax cuts. You wouldn't expect me to just
a
few days before an autumn.
Taxes on work.
Here is the principle. There is a big dividing line between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party because we believe lower taxes are essential for a high-growth economy. So we do want to bring down the tax burden, but we will only do so responsibly. Now, you've just been talking about the fact we've halved inflation. The one thing we won't do is any kind of tax cut that fuels inflation. We've done all this hard work. We're not going to throw that away. But in an autumn statement for growth, because I do want to turn the corner, I do want people to see, the fact, for example, that our...
the difference in the Labour and the Tory parties is that neither of them have any idea about what they're doing with regards to taxation, in that Labour are basically doing nothing because the two taxes that they have have a very, very little additional value for the exchequer. And Jeremy Hunt is going to keep the taxation on normal, regular working people at an all-time high, and is instead going to cut taxes on big business and on multi-millionaire inheritees.
Technology industry is double the size of Germany's and 3 times the size of France. If we're going to embrace those opportunities, we need to remove the barriers that stop businesses growing. And that's why this autumn statement will be focused on growth.
Well, let me not interrupt you and so on. Let me give you the chance to be clear. Because you said to a national newspaper yesterday, this point that you made, that we're at a turning point, and it was a time to show the path to tax cuts. Which way are you facing? Are you heading towards tax cuts or are you not?
I'm saying what I actually said yesterday, my words were, we need to show there is a path to a lower tax
we need
economy.
to show there's a path. But that path might be quite long.
Well, in the end, if we want to you talked about personal taxes just now. If you want to bring down personal taxes, the only way to do that sustainably is to spend public money more efficiently. Yesterday, I was with my new Chief Secretary of the Treasury. I was meeting police officers who are saying they waste hours and hours every week filling out forms, redacting forms. I talked to ambulance drivers delayed at hospitals.
Yeah, that's the big problem. That's why we don't have any low taxes in this country. It's because police officers are too busy filling in forms. That's it. Job done. Problem solved. Right? Just get rid of the forms. That I'm sure that'll fix the economy. Well done, Jeremy. Hard at work there.
Okay.
We need to tackle those problems. That Rome wasn't built in a day, as you know very well,
can we
Trevor.
just
So
stick
these
with-
things take time.
Can we just stick with the tax question? There's a lot of talk about an inheritance tax cut. I'm going to assume that that is at least on the table for you. I know you're not going to tell me what you're going to do, but unless you say it's not on the table, let's just talk about that.
Trevor, everything is on the table
Right.
in
Well,
an autumn statement, and
okay.
I'm afraid, as you know,
Okay.
much as I would like to give you a
I know,
world
I know,
first,
I'm not,
I
I'm
can't
not,
do
I'm
that.
not going to ask you if you're going to do it. I'm going to ask you to take a view about it. Can you explain to me how a cut in inheritance tax would encourage the economic growth you've just been talking about?
Well, I'm not going to talk about any individual taxes because that will lead to even more fevered
I'm not asking
speculation
you about
as to
whether
what I
you're
might
gonna do
do.
it. I'm just asking you.
I know, but I'm not
It's on
going
the
to. I'm not
table.
going to talk about any individual taxes. What I will give you is a general view about tax. It's too high. A Conservative government wants to bring it down because we think that lower tax is essential to economic growth. Let me explain why I say that, because it is important. If you look at the most dynamic economies around the world, they don't.
Dynamic is not a word that means anything. Dynamic is not a word with any meaning that has any kind of quantifiable nature to it when we're looking at a government's fiscal policy. A dynamic economy meaningless terms, right? If you want to actually look at countries with high growth, right? How about you look at, say, for example, Norway? Does Norway have a lower high taxation level, Jeremy? Answer on a postcard.
Don't tend to be in Europe. They tend to be in North America and Asia. Those tend to be places where the tax burden is lower. We recognise that.
Right, so we can't even name specific countries based upon tax burden and economic growth. But what he does say is that these general areas are ones with higher growth, and they're the general areas that have low tax countries in them. Well, that's definitely how statistics work. That's definitely how correlation works. When you just point at vague areas, talk about how most of them are like that, and then say, well, just generally higher growth. I mean, most of those countries in the global north have high growth because of all the continual kind of colonial resource extraction. But on top of that, right, the countries in Europe that have high growth are not necessarily the low tax ones anyway. Exactly. There's no correlation between low taxes and good economies. Just look at Liz Truss.
Truth. The Labour Party does not. Labour, let me just finish, because I think this is a very important point. Labour put taxes up every single one of their 13 budgets when they're in power. Conservatives cut taxes when we can, but we only do so responsibly.
Yeah, you put them up yourself.
Yeah.
We know about fiscal drag and all of that. Okay, let's just ask this simple point. Tax burden is around about 37% of GDP right now. Will it come down before the next election?
Thing is, and when you look at the grand scheme of things, it isn't particularly high. If we look at G20 countries, well, that tax burden is kind of in the middle, slightly above the middle. Like, we're not like the highest tax country in the world, not by a long shot.
Well, I will publish the figures from the OBR on Wednesday, and you'll see what they say about that. But I will answer this question this way. I want to bring down our tax burden. I think it's important for a productive, dynamic, fizzing economy that you...
Oh, it's fizzing now, is it? Oh, okay. I'm certainly reassured now, chat. I'm certainly reassured that this man knows exactly what he's doing in charge of one of the most biggest economies in the world, right? I'm sure that the man who describes it as a dynamic and fizzing economy knows exactly how to get economic growth. And as Ben Sharp points out, if you really want economic growth, the current fastest growing advanced economy is the United States, because Joe Biden pumped billions of dollars into infrastructure investment and had a massive state investment from the Inflation Reduction Act as well. That is the metric that we have, is Keynesian economics, deficit spending on state infrastructure to be able to increase productivity, right? That's how you get a growing economy, not just not just cutting taxes and hoping all of that extra money that rich people will get will go into investment in the supply side of the economy and not indeed get shipped off to the Cayman Islands.
Motivate people to
Okay.
do the work, take the risks that we need.
I'm only hustling you because we're short of time because you've got to go elsewhere. But the other plank in your statement is going to be about jobs, and you said that you want to bring 1.1 million people back into work. Now, over the past 4 years, you and your predecessors have been saying that. And we've had a plan for the jobs, the Kickstart scheme, a Way to Work campaign, the Restart scheme, a new midlife MOT, and the Universal Support Programme. 6 programmes which are all supposed to do the same thing. And here, I want to show you something. Here's the result of that. We can see how many people have are employed relative to December 2019 when you came into office. There are about 200,000 people less in work than when you came into office after these 6 programmes. What's new about this one that's going to change?
Of course, the big problem here, right, is that what they think here is going on here is too many people just not working because they don't want to work. When the truth is, in fact, that we did really poorly out of the pandemic, and we've seen a huge rise in people who are too sick to work. And that's a problem because of failure on terms of the dealing with the pandemic, but also a gigantic failure on funding and capital investment into the NHS, on falling living standards affecting people's overall health outside of NHS underfunding because of low wages, again, poor spending from the state in terms of all of the rest of the things that drive productivity and drive higher wages, things like better schooling, things like better communities, all of these myriad factors that make up the building blocks of a productive economy. And those things haven't happened. And so people have very low living standards, which means they don't eat properly, they don't exercise properly, they don't have healthier lives, because it's far more difficult to have a healthy life when you're as poor and as with as low living standards as you've seen. And that's kicked loads of people out of the labour market, right? It's kicked loads of people out of the labour market. And they're not going back until they're healed, until they're better. And so what Jeremy Hunt has gone is like, oh, well, we've put loads of people out of work by ruining their health due to our failures on NHS and on social investment, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to force these people to do jobs that they can't physically do because of how disabled they are, to save a few bob to be able to cut taxes for the mega wealthy and their disgusting little offspring inheriting their ill-gotten fortunes from them as well. Brilliant, love it, great country, fantastic, just what we wanted.
It's quite interesting, Trevor, that you...
I know, you're going to tell me COVID. You're going to tell me COVID. I know that.
No, hang on. Let me answer the question. You rather conveniently didn't mention that there was the once-in-a-century pandemic, and actually that the trend line is going up. There's ups and downs again. But let me tell you what's actually happened.
Let me tell you something that you might not know.
You tell me things and I'll tell you things. How about that?
Which is that even if we take COVID into account, actually, you'd probably have a couple of 100,000 people more in work. But the point is, you've had these 6 programmes in 4 years, haven't made any difference. What's going to be different about this one?
Well, I just profoundly disagree. If you look at the bigger record since 2010, unemployment is down by nearly 1 million people. We have succeeded.
Unemployment is not the same as labour force participation. What those figures you're seeing there, of the graph that Trevor Phillips has just shown, is about labour force participation, the total number of people in work, right? If you're too sick and therefore unable to work, you are not unemployed, you are long-term sick. The unemployment figures are people who are not working and who are currently looking for work, right? And those figures are down, that's true. But the labour force participation rate is still low because our country is very sick because of the failures of this Conservative Party to engage in any amount of state social investment to keep people healthy enough to stay working. That's the problem, right? Unemployment may be low, but people's jobs and wages aren't very good either. This isn't the same thing.
In getting people back to work. But as we stand right now, after that once-in-a-century pandemic, we have a situation where every year we are signing off over 500,000 people onto benefits because of a sickness or disability, and saying they don't even have to look for work, even though many of them would like.
I mean, they're sick and disabled. That's why they're not currently looking for work. And that's why they should be having access to welfare payments, even if they are looking for work, they should absolutely have access to it, right? The fact that not only do you want to cut benefits in total in terms of the budget, you're also trying to strip away things like PIP from disabled people too. As I've already mentioned, we literally had a UN Special Rapporteur investigate the UK for human rights violations of the disabled and called it a human catastrophe. And do you think what you need to do is make these people even more immiserated? What an absolute scumbag.
To work. Now, in an economy, and I'm Chancellor, where you have nearly 1 million vacancies, that is wrong. But I also think it's wrong for the individuals concerned. Much better. Let me finish. No, you need to let me explain. You need to let me explain, because you've asked me about these programmes. Let me explain what I announced with Mel Stride this week. We are going to spend £2.5 billion helping more than 1 million people with things like mental health support, to help them get back into work. We think that is good for the economy, but also good for them.
But you're also telling them that if they don't get a job, then actually you're going to withdraw benefit from them. So there's a lot of stick here as well as this carrot.
Well, for people who aren't ill or don't have a disability, there's about 300,000 people who've been out of work for more than a year without any illness or any disability. We think it is fair to say, if you're not engaging with this process at all, if you don't engage for 6 months, we're going to close your case and stop your benefit. And I think taxpayers would expect nothing less.
It's not about getting them in work, it's about getting them off benefits. It is actually, I do think it's about getting them in work. Not because they care about people working or not, but because they want to cool the labour market, right? They actually, despite them bragging about low unemployment, they think that unemployment is too low. They think that it's below the Nauru, and that is fueling inflation, right? So they want to cool the labour market to kneecap the bargaining power of workers to get better wages, because they think that there's a fear of a wage price spiral. But workers' wages continue to rise in America, and they're still bringing inflation down while spending government money. There is no wage price spiral. It is greedflation, and we need to take some of that money back through a higher pay packet, as Mick Lynch was saying beforehand, right? That's how we need to solve the cost of living crisis. Where they're trying to cool the labour market and undercut Labour's ability to be able to demand higher wages by increasing competition for jobs, by getting people out of the welfare system and force them to look for jobs, to undermine the bargaining power of workers. That's what they did throughout the austerity period, right? That's why wages have been stagnant for so long. But this is the easiest way of trying to convince somebody that spending on the welfare budget is a good thing. Higher welfare payments makes people who work have higher wages, because then employers are having to compete better with the state, right? If you can make as much money on benefits as you can going into work, right? Why would you do that rather than take the welfare payment? So by increasing welfare payments, the companies have to start paying higher wages to compete with the state. When you increase the welfare spending budget, it pushes up wages for everybody too. It would also reduce unemployment, which gets us to a point where the labour market becomes even tighter and workers' bargaining power is much higher.
Well, at one level, you understand what the Chancellor's saying. We still do have a lot of people out of work in a time of a tight labour market and a lot of vacancies. But equally, we do have possibly the meanest welfare system in Europe in terms of how it treats those who are unemployed. I mean, the level of unemployment benefits have not risen in real terms in more than 50 years, whilst earnings and so on have gone up 2.5, 3 times. So the level of that benefit is way below where it used to be relative to earnings. We do know that some changes you can make do push people back into work. So something that started under the last Labour government and continued under this government has been reducing the age at which of kids at which lone parents have to look for work. And that's been, at one level, incredibly successful. We've got a massive increase in the fraction of lone parents who are in work, but they are literally all in low-paid part-time work. So that's actually not saved the government possibly anything, because they're still...
Yeah, because 40% of universal credit claimants are those who are currently in work, who don't earn enough money and then have to claim universal credit, right? We then still have to pay all these people's housing benefit because housing is too expensive, because our government hasn't been able to build enough homes to be able to deal with the increase in demand because of the increasing population size. So none of this has made any fiscal dent in terms of the government budget. All it's done is immiserate individuals. All it's done is break apart our communities. All it's done is make our living standards even lower than they were before. It's not fiscally or financially suitable or smart or responsible. And quite frankly, what people would always accuse other left-wing governments of fiscal irresponsibility for putting ideology above pragmatism, ironically, because they don't care about looking financially viable. They care about punishing poor people and undermining workers. That's what they really and truly care about.
On benefits, they're not paying much in the way of taxes, and some of those lone parents have actually been pushed onto incapacity benefits. So we've got a system which is actually quite good at pushing people into work, but it almost always pushes them into low-paid part-time works when they're still on in-work benefits.
So the solution, of course, to this issue of why aren't people getting into work is make work actually pay by increasing the bargaining power of labour, have sectoral bargaining, increase levels of unionisation, make unionisation easier, and then use that to gain higher wages so that people who aren't working currently have the benefit of much increased living standards by going into work. But they don't have at the moment because work doesn't pay any money. And when you do get work, it's incredibly low-paid, gig economy, Uber Eats style. You hate how the right are seen as the economically literate ones. It's so frustrating, right? People have got it into their head. Sound economics is when you don't spend money. And that is stupid, right? Anyone who's run a business knows that that's not how you make money. You have to spend money to make money, right? I know that's an aphorism, but it's basically true. You can't just not spend any money and hope that your business succeeds. You have to invest. You have to invest to be able to speculate, to accumulate, right? But why we don't take this opinion when we talk about the government spending, where it makes it look like economic competence is when you don't spend. But of course, economic competence is when you do spend on the right things. And the moment we're spending on nothing, this is why your schools are collapsing, this is why the NHS is in crisis, this is why the asylum processing system is a gigantic backlog that we're probably never going to see the end of, and why our entire fabric of our social security service is falling apart, right? It's because these people won't spend money at all, even on good things. They just think that the only way that you run a government is by not spending any money at all. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.